Hundreds of thousands of migrants land on European shores each year, many fleeing persecution or economic hardship. The EU has agreed on a new plan to deter and redistribute them. But why are so many countries unhappy about that deal? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, growing numbers of potential asylum seekers are making their way to frontline European countries. A revamped deal will mean more help for those nations, but does it go far enough?
Dozens of migrants rescued off the coast of Gran Canaria. Coast Guards have been busy. They've rescued over 13,000 people in the first 3 months of the year. In 2023, there were over 385,000 irregular border crossings into the EU, an 18% increase from the previous year. Countries that neighbour Africa and Asia are understandably where these crossings occur. They do the heavy lifting in terms of processing and enforcement and want other EU nations to share the responsibility.
The European Parliament has just voted in favour of a new way forward on asylum and migration. This is a historic day for Europe. I want to thank members of the European Parliament who have spent years working on this.
In fact, it's been at least 8 years in the making. The agreement would fast-track asylum procedures at the EU's border, impose tougher screening systems, and return those who don't qualify more quickly to their home countries. Some NGOs and left-wing policymakers worry the deal doesn't adequately address asylum seekers' human rights. Those on the far right fear it doesn't go far enough and won't act as a deterrent. More than policy or scoring political points, for those attempting the dangerous journey into Europe, it is a matter of life and death. Thousands who set off for a better future do not make it.
Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Brussels is Lina Vosyliute. She's a former research fellow in the Justice and Home Affairs Unit. That's at the Centre for European Policy Studies. She's also the founder of the Heartwarmingly consultancy. In Porto, in Portugal, is Ines Neves, a lecturer in the Faculty of Law. That's at the University of Porto. And here with me in the studio is Claire Pearsall. She's former special advisor at the UK's Home Office. Claire, I'll come to you first. The far right don't like this new legislation. The far left don't like it. You're a moderate conservative, and I'm told you don't like it. What's wrong with it?
I can understand what the EU is looking to do, but I think, unfortunately, they are looking to solve a problem by creating further problems. There is no clarity on what the financial reparation would be for countries that don't wish to take part in the EU pact, because it is voluntary, it's not going to be a compulsory scheme. There's also no provision given for who is in charge of people who go missing at sea. So the search and rescue effort in the Mediterranean, which member states will be in charge of that. And there's also detention at the border. It looks like it's going to create longer stays at the border, longer detention times for individuals, no provision for women, children, and those who are possibly human trafficking victims.
So you think it's not good enough?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I can understand they want to share out responsibility across member states, and that is quite fair. But the way they're doing it is just going to put even more pressure on the likes of Greece and Italy and Malta.
Lina, what's your reading of all the work that's gone into this? I mean, it's taken 8 years.
It has been celebrated as political achievement or ability for European Parliament and the Council to find a solution or some sort of agreement. However, like the far-right groups, the human rights groups are also disagreeing whether this solution will lead to more clarity and towards more solidarity. As the colleague in the studio has just mentioned, the solidarity is up for sailouts or buyouts. So actually, countries who do not want to relocate and take refugees and asylum seekers within their countries can pay for other EU member states 20,000 euros per each person. So this is not the face of solidarity that many Europeans would like to see, and we are going backwards without really resolving the key issues such as Dublin regulation and the first entry rule that is still within the current new asylum and migration pact.
Ines, your reading of it, I mean, it's not perfect, but at least they've got there, haven't they? I mean, it's progress of sorts.
Yeah, that's precisely that. It is important to remember that this is a complex issue, and the fact that the far right and the far left agree to disagree is proof of that. I don't think that a perfect solution could be found. There never will be in these cases. It's more important that is seen as a working principle, and I think there are improvements. At least it is a beginning. Indeed, this is being thought mainly since the refugee crisis in 2016, and since then the European Union has been attempting to address the increase in irregular migration and the mixed flows of refugees and migrants. Actually, back in 2016, the European Commission proposed reforms to the common European asylum system, but even though the aim was to shorten, to simplify the procedures and to provide more guarantees of harmonization, given the growing tension among member states, it failed. So at least this is a beginning, a working principle.
Well, let's take a closer look at what's actually in this deal. So, asylum seekers will undergo quicker checks upon arrival, including collecting fingerprints and health assessments. There'll be a revised asylum procedure, which will determine what happens to people once they apply, and new solidarity measures between member states will help frontline countries manage migration flows. Claire, for this to work, it means an awful lot of people coming together and getting on board, doesn't it? I mean, 27 different countries. Can that happen?
Well, that's where I think the difficulty lies, because each individual member state will have their own views and their own constituents' views on migration and resettlement of refugees. And if you look at the number of people globally who are on the move, I think every member state will look at how many people they can realistically support. So you're going to have some member states that are going to be willing to take a larger number than others. There are some who have already stated that they wish to take none whatsoever. And that financial sort of solidarity package, again, that's not clear what that will look like, whether logistical help with processing of refugees will actually take place and how many people will be sent over. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of squabbling between states. I think this is now setting the EU up to have a fight amongst the 27 member countries. And of course, in the United Kingdom, we are removed from that, but we have our own set of issues. So it's a very similar backdrop, very angry people, no solutions coming forward, and whatever solutions are not deemed to be correct.
Now, you're removed from it because Britain's no longer in the EU, famously.
Yeah.
However, you're still very much affected by it because a lot of these migrants want to come to the UK.
Well, that's right. We're still seeing a large flow across the channel from France into the United Kingdom. And I think in some respects, this could actually make that worse for the United Kingdom, because if you have delays and people being detained for longer and they know that's going to happen, it's going to push them into the shadows, into the hands of smugglers, people traffickers, to circumnavigate what the EU member states have put in place. And they will try and get to the United Kingdom through other ways. And you're going to get some very vulnerable people being abused, children being abused, and none of us want to see any of that.
Lina, frontline countries like Italy and Greece have been screaming out for help for many, many years now. Do you think this deal will give them more of the assistance that they've been asking for?
Unfortunately not. I think that, as colleagues have just indicated, this kind of protracted measures will be left still up for negotiations between member states, whether and how to help. And one of the means that we have just highlighted is this financial contributions, 20,000 per each non-relocated asylum seeker or refugees. Another measure or mechanism that has been put forward is solidarity in returns. Basically, that instead of relocating, EU member state could cooperate in helping to return refugee or asylum seeker, failed asylum seeker from this country. However, there is also a third option to contribute with some kind of cooperation measures, even with third countries. So we see that actually instead of European Union member states coming together and helping each other, as we have seen with the example of Ukraine and where it worked really wonderfully, we will have more kind of measures and looking outside and looking for solutions on how we can externalize the migration and include further countries like Egypt, Tunisia, to procure external asylum processing with Albania. Unfortunately, this is more, European Union is now more investing in deterrence measures that people actually would not even reach the EU. And then, this would be not a question for the EU to solve. Then another step is very much focused on deportations. Actually, one of the new initiatives has been that EU member states could return asylum seekers while the appeals on the return are still pending. So basically, while their case is still ongoing, person could be sent and deported. And, maybe answer is negative that this person shouldn't be deported, but, this is done. So we are on numerous ways also backtracking on the rule of law and legal certainty guarantees.
Ines, we saw the results of your recent national elections in Portugal. How much of an issue is migration on the street when you're talking to people in Portugal? Is it a big talking point?
I guess all over Europe, it's a topic that has been in the foreground of several national elections. In June, Europeans will go to the ballots, and we have national elections as well in other member states. And this was and is certainly a topic of concern. It leads to polarization and fragmentation of society. It leads to some different approaches to migration. It's a complex issue, but it's also a political issue as well. In several meanings, we have seen the instrumentalization and weaponization of migrants, which is at the root of the crisis and force majeure regulation as well. But is also a topic of concern because of the flux of migrants and what that entails for the rise of some political forces. So it's certainly a hot topic in Portugal and other countries as well. And it has been dealt with by several debates on the topic.
Claire, is it fair to say that migration is the one key factor that drives voters into the arms of the far right?
It does feel like it's that top issue. And it's quite interesting because if you go out and speak to individuals on the street during election campaigns, it isn't the top issue. Even in places that are suffering with higher levels of migrants being housed there, it's cost of living, it's energy, it's the NHS. It is all of those things that affect somebody personally. The media likes to pick up migration, and it does highlight to a certain demographic of the United Kingdom that it is a problem. But when you drill down the details as to how many migrants somebody has actually met and do they understand the countries that they come from, and unfortunately we deal a lot in misinformation. A lot of people just don't understand why people are on the move, what is going on, and what leads that migration crisis to occur. And I think that we will see more conversation about this in the summer. We all remember the pictures from Lampedusa of last summer and how overwhelmed they were. And I think that's when you get to the height, and that brings it into everybody's attention. And that is where some people on the right tend to use that as a divisive issue.
And June, of course, we have European elections.
Yeah.
UK not involved in that. But just give us your feeling about those elections. Do you think this deal has done enough to kind of take the wind out of the sails of far-right politicians in Europe on this issue?
I don't think it has. And this is somebody looking in from the outside, but I don't think it has. I think it's actually going to empower more on the right of politics to actually use this as a bigger issue and a bigger wedge and divisive issue than it ever has been. So I don't think this is going to solve a problem. I think it's actually going to create much more electoral instability than stability.
Lena, I'll come to you on that point. June elections coming up. It's going to be huge across the whole of the European Union, 27 member states voting. Do you get the impression that migration will be a big issue in those elections in a few weeks' time?
Yes and no. On the one hand, I feel that, again, people are more concerned with the issues that are touching them more closely and more personally, such as situation with jobs, energy, security, and so on. On the other hand, we see that politicians are trying to use the migration, especially in the countries where there are very few migrants arriving, such as, let's say, Baltics, where we had a so-called EU-Belarus border crisis, and where it was said that there was instrumentalization of migration going on. But when we look at the numbers, these are really few numbers in comparison what these countries have afforded to accept. For instance, how many Ukrainian asylum seekers and refugees have been accepted under temporary protection directive. So I think those issues are in a way being made divisive by policymakers not finding the solutions that work, that are evidence-based. And I think, therefore, it's even more important to highlight that the current EU and Migration Pact has been rejected by even 300 academics, researchers and scholars who work in the field, and also like 160 civil society organizations that look into various alternatives and ways that work, and these are proven ways such as regularization, alternatives to detention, safe pathways, humanitarian corridors, and so on, humanitarian visas, temporary protection that luckily has been applied. However, we do not see a big political mobilization, and the pact, if anything, neglects those solutions and actually looks the other way, in a way to somehow demonstrate the mighty power of those politicians who want to be seen as protecting EU borders, as protecting EU citizens, but protecting from what? And unfortunately, what we also see within our research, that by European Union member states, for instance, engaging in pushbacks, creating this legal uncertainty and clarity, what is smuggling and what is, for instance, humanitarian assistance, we are getting closer with our methods towards the countries that we want to protect ourselves from. So as Belarus or even Russian regime, where humanitarian actors and human rights defenders are, for instance, criminalized.
Let's bring Ines in. Ines, I want to ask you, is there a feeling, do you think, that some countries are doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to migration? Italy, Greece, and some countries are really not pulling their weight?
I certainly do, because while the new pact actually wants to amend the Dublin III regulation, the country of first entry is still the main criteria for that, which imposes a big or a huge burden on the frontier countries. This is something that the EU has managed to re-equilibrate, both with the solidarity mechanism, but with flexibility with regard to the specific support or contributions, like my colleagues just said, and with the crisis and force majeure regulation, which try to solve an extraordinary mass influx of third country nationals. But despite these two improvements, I still think that those countries will be the most affected by this concern. And we are speaking here of an issue that has different answers in the 27 member states. Member states will have different willingness to implement the package. The Commission has already stated that it is willing to launch infringement procedures against non-compliant states, which is something that proves that there is that risk that we must deal with. So most of this will depend on implementation, and I'm not sure, even if I'm more confident in the pact, at least as a beginning, I'm not sure if this will alleviate the pressure on the frontier countries.
Claire, your Prime Minister, who obviously has nothing to do with this deal now because Britain's out of Europe, a year ago he said, judge me on these criteria, and one of them was stop the boats. Just give us an impression of how that's going for the UK.
Badly. That's a very straight answer for you. They haven't stopped. It was one of those pledges that was always doomed to fail. You will never be able to stop 100% of the crossings. There will always be desperate people willing to take that perilous journey. So I think that if it said he would reduce the crossings, look to work with partners in the European Union, and I know that that is a little bit toxic when you look into our own politics and our own behaviour with the European Union, but I think that actually we can have a grown-up conversation and work with them. But just to say stop the boats as a small island on our own, it isn't going to work.
Do you think leaving the European Union then was a mistake in terms of dealing with migration? What's the relationship like now that Britain is out but still impacted?
We've always had a very tricky relationship with the European Union. The United Kingdom has always liked to set itself to one side, and vast numbers of people in this country, millions of people, voted to leave. So that's what we've implemented. It should have made it easier to control our borders, but conversely, it absolutely hasn't, because we've lost access to all of those crime prevention databases within Europe. We've lost access to the Dublin regulations and return schemes. So many different kinds of tools that we used to have that we now longer don't. And I think we needed to have made arrangements with the 27 member states separately as regard of returns, to look at intelligence sharing, and that just hasn't been done. And I think it was very, very short-sighted of the UK not to have that in place.
And one final question to you. UK election coming up at some point, possibly in the next 6 months. Is migration likely to be a big talking point for people?
I think the government would wish to make it a large talking point for people, but I absolutely don't think it's going to come in the top three whatsoever. Cost of living, it's going to be NHS, housing, education.
Yeah, and migration further down the line.
List. Yeah.
Lina, if you were looking at the deal, what tweaks or changes to improve it would you have made?
Numerous. One, and maybe the key one, to bring the EU Migration and Asylum Pact in line with the global agreements and global commitments that have been done under the Global Compact for Migration and Global Compact for Refugees, that both have been accepted or launched in 2018. And unfortunately, EU, instead of relying on this global solidarity and showing the global leadership on migration, because migration, as we know, is global phenomenon, decided to go its own route and actually to neglect those commitments under the UN or global level, and to come up with its own partial and, let's say, unequal solidarity, while finding a ways to implement its own bilateral partnerships and deals with the third countries, as we have mentioned before. So I think that would be the key, that the EU would undertake the global leadership and would implement what's promised. And maybe if we would look just on very micro issues, I think very important measure that has been lost or European Parliament has not prevented from happening is still detention of families with children, and in general detention as a measure. And I think colleague Claire has also highlighted that this will lead to overcrowding, and I think this will be very visible failure, and it can be misused and by far-right parties that
Thanks,
look.
Lina. I want to bring in Ines. Final question to you, Ines. Same question. What tweak would you have made to improve this deal?
I guess there was a little bit of rush to solve the question ahead of the June elections. And as a result, there are some points that will gain in higher transparency and specification. I remember, or I can recall, that there are issues that can actually occur, and Portugal is an example, since it has special relations with Portuguese-speaking countries. And as a result, there are special mechanisms for citizens to enter Portugal in that regard. That's an example of what will gain in transparency. But I agree that the alignment with international standards would also be positive to solve any doubts for the future.
Ines, Lina and Claire, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.